All right, folks, you guys are in for a real treat this afternoon. My guest this week has had an amazing career in showbiz that has spanned more than 6 decades. During that time, he has appeared in television shows like Get Smart, Bewitched, Captain Kangaroo, The Golden Girls, Alf, Grace Under Fire, to name a very few, folks. On the big screen, he has appeared in films alongside greats like Burt Reynolds, Sally Field, Julia Roberts, Jeff Bridges, Al Pacino, and Paul Newman, to name a few. But he is probably best remembered for playing the role as Jim Baker in the John Hughes 1984 coming-of-age film 16 Candles, and as Dad in the 1979 classic film Breaking Away. He's also had an amazing career on stage as well, folks. He joins me this afternoon to talk about his amazing journey through Hollywood. One of the great character actors, folks. Actor Paul Dooley, folks. Paul, first of all, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Paul, I want to start off early in your career. Your career, like I said, you're doing small gigs as a comedian, and you parlay that into an appearance on the Jack Paar show. How does that happen?
Well, it was an odd circumstance. I was really new at stand-up. I bet I hadn't done more than about 30 different one-night stands, and we called them club dates in those days. Might have been a bar mitzvah, might have been a birthday, it might have been a nightclub, it could be anything. But I hadn't done a lot of work, and there were comedians with much more experience. And just like today, everyone's trying to get on the talk shows, especially the Tonight Show. I did a little club date, as we called them, a place called Upper Saddle River, New Jersey. And it was an evening with about 50 accountants and their wives in a party. One would expect them not to be the greatest laughers.
Right.
But anyway, I did very well, and I thought they loved what I did. And a couple of days later, I got a call from a guy who says, I'd like you to come in and talk to my manager. I manage comedians. I said, sure. So I go to meet with him, and he says, I represent Jonathan Winters, and Jonathan is on the Jack Paar show.
Wow.
Probably every week or every second week. And Paar falls off his chair every time Johnny does his comedy. I'd like to take you over to meet him. So he said, show me some of your routines. So I showed them routines that I had, some of my best stuff. And in a couple of days, we were right there with Jack Paar, and instead of auditioning for his talent coordinator, which is what you do now, here's Jack Paar and 2 or 3 assistants, maybe 4 people in the room all together. And so they said, show us something. So I did, from the top, I did my best piece, and they were all sort of not unrelated jokes, but they were beginning, middle, and end stories. They were a little bit more like what Newhart worked like. I'd be talking to invisible people, for example. And the same way sometimes Jonathan Winters would do a scene like that. So I do my best thing, and they said, very nice, what else you got? I ran through about 6 pieces, and that was my whole act, a half hour.
Wow.
And they said, what else you have? And I didn't have anything else. But I remembered a routine that I was working on with the writer, because most of the stuff I did in those days, I had a guy who was a wonderful comedy writer. I met him when he was a school teacher. Neither of us had a nickel, and we liked each other when we hung around together, and he wrote material for me, basically on spec, and if I ever started making money, I would pay him off and share with him. So we had a routine, was halfway finished, a couple of minutes only, about what would it be if the President of the United States were a kid who was about 4 years old. And it was based on a Time magazine article saying Bobby Kennedy and Jack Kennedy and a lot of others are showing that people are now getting into Congress and the Senate and even in the governorships and mayors when they're still 35 or 37. So they were talking about the youth movement in politics. Traditionally, guys who become presidents are already 65 or something. So I was kidding around. I was imitating my nephew, and I wasn't doing it as a president, just as a kid. And we started working on it. We found some good jokes, and so I go in and I show that to them. And even though I don't have an ending yet, I just had 2 minutes. They said, "Great, we love it. You'll be on next Thursday."
Oh wow!
So what other guys in town with much more experience were trying to get on that show, I lucked out, partly because of Jonathan Winters' connection.
Wow.
I would do jokes like this. The kid said, "What's that noise on the White House lawn?" Oh, it's a bunch of senators. Oh, I guess it's recess. And there were a great many jokes that worked very well.
Do you remember
Dickie Nixon. Who can I play with this afternoon? My buddies, my friends. Well, I can't do Dickie Nixon. He won't play unless he can be the president. And this was all during Eisenhower's reign.
Right. Wow.
Anyway, it was done. Then he invited me back and did a few other shows.
Wow. Paul, radio back during the early days was, before television, was considered to be the TV of its day. You have a great fascination with radio back in the early days.
I did. I started when I was 10 years old or something, and I have a kind of a sponge-like memory for comedy, if I like it. And I still remember routines I heard on the radio because Red Skelton was one of the guys I listened to, Jack Benny. But a program that my dad liked, because I had to listen to whatever he liked also, was a team called Jimmy Durante and Gary Moore, who people know later for other shows. Not really a great, hilarious guy, but amusing and likable. And Jimmy Durante was his partner. So I remember them, and I later worked on the Gary Moore show because I knew Carol Burnett, and she was a regular on that a variety show he had, I suppose, back in the, 60s. So whenever they need an extra hand in a sketch, she'd recommend me, and I'd go over and work with them. And I went to Gary Moore a couple of times, started doing jokes he had done 40 years earlier. My God, how do you know that? I said, well, I listened to you as a kid, and I loved it, and I memorized a lot of your routines. And I've always been like that. I'm like a walking encyclopedia for you name a comic, and I'll tell you his best jokes. The ones I like best.
They had some great writers. Those guys had some great writers back then.
They were the radio writers were a lot of them were out of vaudeville, and they had been people who wrote material for vaudeville comics. They were comics themselves. They were great writers. Jack Benny had a great crew.
Neil Simon.
20 years on radio and then 20 years on television.
The Simon brothers were also some of the great writers of that era.
Absolutely, and I did Neil Simon's play. They called him Doc, The Odd Couple on Broadway.
Right, we're going to get into that. So you drive it. All of a sudden, so you do. After that, you start off doing theater.
When I got to New York, the first union you can usually get into is equity.
Right.
It's easier to get into that than it is at film and television.
Because you graduate from
West. I did a lot of off-Broadway, as I mentioned to you in a little pre-conversation. I was in a very prestigious show off-Broadway called The Threepenny Opera, which has been revived twice on Broadway. And this was with Beatrice Arthur was in it, Charlotte Ray, John Astin.
Oh, Charlotte Ray. Past guest on the show. She was dying. She's a great woman. She'll be missed.
Yeah, she was a good friend of mine, especially near the end.
So you get to New York.
Until it was B. Arthur, I was not only a couple of times on the Golden Girls, but I worked with B in the theater out here in Beverly Hills on other theaters, and I played her husband in a play written by Ann Mira, who's
Ann Mira, yes,
Stiller and Mira.
Yes.
I also became a head writer for Stiller and Mira when they had a little sketch show on television, I guess way back in the early 70s. So we were all good friends in those days. And also I helped them write a lot of radio commercials. They had a whole career in radio commercials. So you came to Stiller and Mira.
So, Paul, you graduate from West Virginia University, and you head down to New York City in a 1948 Dodge with $50 in your pocket, heading to New York City.
Right.
Heading to New York City, and a dear friend of yours helps you get some work. Who was that?
Don Knotts.
Wow.
Don Knotts is from West Virginia. He lived in the college town, and he was a senior when I was a freshman, so I just knew him for one season. But, of course, we connected and hooked up and talked about a lot of comedy and did some comedy together. There weren't so many places to play in that little town. There weren't comedy clubs per se, or many nightclubs, but we would entertain fraternity guys, that would go over there and get 10 or 20 or $25 just to come over and do a half hour. But he's a wonderful guy and he's very funny.
Was he ever...
Don started when he was a real kid, like 12 years old. He used to have a ventriloquist dummy on his knee. And I noticed he showed me the dummy. He was still had it in his in his closet somewhere in college. And he and the dummy had the exact same voice because Don had a high voice. He'd say, "Hello, Tommy." "Hi, Don. How are you?" Same voice.
Wow. Yeah, Don was one of the greats. You're one of the greats. You know, to pay the rent, like I said, you did some magic acts. You were a magician, and you played bar mitzvahs and wherever you can get a gig to pay the rent. But, you know, throughout your career, you've appeared in over 500 TV commercials and nearly 1,000 radio spots. Is that true?
That's true.
Wow.
Between 61 and about 81, for almost 20 years, even though I'd be doing some theater and occasional television shots, my real income was from commercials. And one of the reasons was, and it's a sad thing to say, but when TV first started, it was sort of late 40s, early 50s, the people they hired for commercials were radio announcers who had been on radio doing announcing. They were used to commercials. And there were no black actors getting parts in commercials when I first started, or Jewish or Hispanic or Muslim or anything. It was all strictly WASP, like Father Knows Best, like a lot of those early TV shows. Very, very white stuff. So I couldn't complain. I didn't even know this till I figured it out later. But I was the guy who could buy the product. I could sell it. I could be the neighbor. I could be the uncle, the next door guy, you know. There's almost no part.
Yeah, you had that look. You could be a TV repairman.
I used all these guys who looked very white bread.
Right.
And it was not a good time for minorities, but it happened to be a right time for me to do a lot of commercials. I would sometimes have 4 or 5 products running in 1 week. You know.
Wow.
You could see me in a lot of different places. I had many, many spokesman jobs where my first real commercial, I auditioned about 40 times and never got one. And then I got one, and they loved the commercial. I was playing a bumbling, incompetent door-to-door salesman, dishwashing soap. And I made 27 Class A commercials in that first year as their spokesman. And then I was deeply embedded in the ad business. All the casting directors in the ad agencies knew who I was because I was a spokesman. And I just kept on being busy in commercials after that. I kind of mostly associated with, kind of a light comedy, like an announcer who had a little humor with it.
Talk about the influence that Buster Keaton had on you early on.
When I was 15, a high school classmate of mine, I was a poor kid, but his family had money, so he had a 8mm projector and a screen and a collection of silent films. And he showed me for the first time Chaplain Keaton, Laura Lenardi, who did also work in silence as well as sound, and Harry Langdon of the silent movie comic, and Harold Lloyd, famous guy who hung from the clock.
Oh, Harold Lloyd, absolutely.
And it blew my mind and my whole idea of what I might want to do. I always thought I was a listener and appreciator of comedy. And that changed everything. And he and I used to take his camera out and shoot our own little silent movies with custard pies and top hats and derbies and canes and all that. And we kept doing that. And he went to college with me, too, this guy. And so we kept that up when we were in college as well, studying theater. We both studied theater and minored in art because we were both, I learned a cartoon because I copied him. He was a cartoonist. And he was a cartoonist for the school paper. When he graduated a year ahead of me, I got that job. And I was so thrilled to be able, I was at that time not sure whether or not I could be a performer. But anyway, the punchline of the thing is that 30 years later, I meet Buster Keaton and do a commercial with him.
Oh, my goodness.
So that blew my mind to think that I could actually do that.
Wow. And did you get
There's 3 things that are not on my resume because they're not accomplishments. One is that I did a commercial with Keaton. I shook hands with Charlie Chaplin.
Wow.
I did a comedy album with Cassius Clay, who's Muhammad Ali.
Right. Wow, amazing. Amazing.
I even was on the Caesar show and did a sketch with the famous Sid Caesar, who was one of my idols also.
Did you, I may be wrong in this comment, but did you appear on the Ed Sullivan Show as well?
I did. I was doing a review in a place called Upstairs at the Downstairs. And had Richard Libertini in it as a good friend of mine.
Yes.
And Jane Alexander, who was known mostly for dramatic acting, but she was in it.
Wow.
And because we were having this comedy show in town, we were invited on there to do scenes from our show. So I was on there twice that way. And at another time, Sullivan Show developed a little stock company of people who could come in and work with more famous people. So when they got a hold of Sid Caesar, they could afford to pay him, but not to pay Carl Reiner, Howard Morris, Imogene Coca, his sidekicks. So they would get actors who worked for scale, just as little as they could pay them. But there was a group of us, about 6 of us. So we'd be invited in, and I worked with Nancy Walker, who's a very famous comedy person who played Rhoda's mother, among other things. And some guys from Canada called, I forget their names, a comedy team from Toronto. And once with Burt Lahr, and once with Keaton, who was on there doing a silent sketch, and needed some people to be in it.
Did you?
So I was on there a half a dozen times.
Wow, amazing. Did you get the chance to even to speak with one-on-one with Buster Keaton when you on the set of the commercial?
I did, but of course he's a very introverted guy in a funny way, and he was by that time he was 75. But I was too timid. I was too awestruck to really talk to him. I just asked him, it was a 2-day shoot, and I said, if I bring your book tomorrow and a picture, would you sign it for me? And he did.
Oh, wow. Oh, nice.
So it says, he doesn't even do his whole name. It says, to Paul with love, Buster.
He actually
I still have that picture.
I remember seeing a brief cameo he had in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World.
Yeah.
Yeah, right at the end, he had that one. Spencer Tracy's car. He tries to push.
If you want to see a genius, you look at the silent work, just like Chaplin.
Yes.
It's great stuff.
Yeah, they weren't necessarily rivals, per se, but they were different types of comedy. Physical. He was more, Charlie Chaplin's more that he could dance like a ballet artist.
Well, he was actually almost a dancer. He was so good.
Yeah, amazing.
And Buster worked in a whole other different way. He was physical comedy, a lot of falls, a lot of physical bits, and so did Chaplin. Chaplin's persona was more of he was kind of a tramp who was smarter than everybody else around him. And he was so beautiful. His pantomime was so intricate and small and big, and he did it in such clever ways that it blows your mind. I just had someone over here who was 21 the other day, young actor, at my house. And let me show you something. And I showed him a short where he is comes home drunk, he's trying to get into bed, in a Murphy bed. And it's about a 15-minute short, and he's brilliant. He finds thousands of ways he goes up a stair and keeps falling down it. There's a pendulum on the top every time he tries to pass in the hallway. The pendulum clock, it hits him in the face and knocks him over. And it's just brilliant, and it's just one of his shorts.
Yeah, very.
That stuff still makes people laugh.
It still does, even to this day. There was actually a Chaplin bit was on a couple weeks ago. I was watching it with my daughter, and she was getting a kick out of it. I said, this guy was a genius, and it's amazing to see that talent. It's still around, and it's thankfully some of these Turner Classics are still showing these films.
Yeah,
Paul, I may be wrong, but you wanted to be part of the studio system, but by the time you got out there, it was gone. Is that true?
Well, I admired movies, and even after all my silent movie comedians were gone, there was still Red Skelton, and there are a lot of people out there who are very funny. I liked what Jack Lemmon did and all that. But the business had drifted out here during the 60s, and then when Johnny Carson moved his show out here for the Tonight Show, because there was a bigger talent pool in California than in New York, he had access to all the movie stars. But I was so busy in commercials in a way, I got sidetracked from moving to California to try to be in television and films. I couldn't complain because I'm making a very nice living. And I wondered, if I go to California, will I still make a nice living? And so I just stayed there, and I did theater and a lot of commercials. And once in a while, somebody would give me a job who had seen me or who knew me. Some guys who used to write for the Gary Moore Show also wrote Forget Smart later.
Oh, wow.
And they just brought me out there and had me play a leading role. And the same thing with a writer who knew me, invited me out to do a part on Alf. In fact, I did 4 episodes, and I was dating Ann Mira, who was a good friend of mine.
Oh,
we got married in that show. We did 4 episodes together.
A funny show back in the good old days. Paul, I said in your intro you had an extensive career in theater. You actually understudied for Art Carney, who was the original Felix. Eventually, you took over the role opposite Walter Matthau. How did you eventually get the role, and what happened to Art Carney?
Well, I got first I got the role as a poker player. There are 4 poker players in the play. And they're all very good roles because the poker game is hilarious the way Neil Simon wrote it. And out of town, we were in Washington and Boston and Wilmington, Delaware. We were out touring in the pre-Broadway tryout for maybe 2 months. And I never replaced Art. But then after we played maybe a couple of months in New York, he didn't come in one night, but he didn't call anybody. So it was just get into the other clothes and you're going on. And then I found out that Art was a drinker. And so I would say on an average about once every 2 weeks, he just wouldn't come in, but he didn't call us and say, I don't feel well. I think he just was in a bar drinking and he probably felt
he was
ashamed to call in and say he was sick or something.
Yeah,
so he just wouldn't show up sometimes. Then one day he didn't come in, then he didn't come in, then he didn't come in. 3 or 4 days, then they couldn't even find him. And it turns out he had put himself into what they called a sanitarium in those days, which is now called rehab, to kind of conquer his drinking habit. But he never returned to the play.
Yeah,
I did it maybe a couple of months, and then I left to do a pilot out in L.A.
Well, yeah, I interviewed Joyce.
I was around it for a year. I mean, in and out of it for a year.
I read somewhere that you used to peek through the curtain and you would see Frank Sinatra, George Burns, Jack Lemmon sitting there in the audience.
That's right. In the first 2 weeks, all the important people had heard about it because it was an instant hit. And they, of course, knew who Neil Simon was and Matthau. Although Matthau was a pretty busy and a pretty well-known actor, but that was really what made him a star, that particular show.
Yes. I mean, did that make it, when you saw those stars out in the front row, did that make it more nerve-wracking for you or more excited?
No, I was never the kind of actor who was nervous about who was in the audience. In fact, I was kind of thrilled that they were there. I know actors say, don't tell me if you're in the audience. I don't want to know who's there until afterwards. But I'm not like that. I don't care. I don't get particularly nervous if someone's there. In fact, it's a little thrilling to know that Jack Lemmon's in the audience.
Wow.
For me. I just never had that problem of being too nervous. The other hidden thing about me that most people don't know is that I created a show called The Electric Company.
Yeah, wow. Well, yeah, absolutely. Talk about that.
Well, I got a call, and they asked me to come over for an interview, and they're putting together a group of writers, and we don't have a show yet. There's no format, no cast, and no title. There's no nothing. There's not even a pilot or anything. We want to see what you guys will come up with if you just work in limbo with the only assignment is that you try to do things that might help kids learn to read. Pretty simple. You know, Sesame Street ran this organization as well as Sesame Street. And Sesame Street's target audience were just kids learning the ABCs and 1, 2, 3. But when that got after they were maybe 4 years old, our target audience was about 4 to 7. And that's who we were helping once they knew the basic letters, the rudiments of learning to read. And I think why they got a hold of me, I mean, at the time I thought it was because I had a small reputation around town of writing radio comedy. And since they liked the idea of having short pieces because of the attention span of children, they didn't want a 5-minute or 10-minute sketch. They wanted 1-minute things, blackouts, crossovers, simple little 2-line jokes, or also maybe just a thing that lasted a minute or a minute and a half. So I had a lot of experience with that, writing radio commercials. And I also had done Second City, where we improvise, and so I knew how to put together sketches of different shorts. Then I found out after I left there 2 years later, I had a luncheon with somebody from the electric company, and I found out the real reason they hired me as one of these people to try to write material was that Carl Reiner had recommended me as a good writer, even though Carl had never seen a word I'd written.
Oh, wow.
I was fortunate enough to have done some sketches with him on a television show once. And when you do sketches, often you sort of make up things on your feet while you're rehearsing. You throw things in. So it's writing even without a pencil, you know. You could say, oh, this guy knows what's funny, so he's a writer. So I didn't even know that. And years later, I met Carl out here and reminded him, and he had no memory of it.
Yeah, the great Morgan, the great Morgan Freeman was also in the electric company, if I'm remember
7
correctly.
years.
Yeah,
in the original show, and ran 7 years.
Whose idea was the silhouettes? Remember the silhouettes?
I'll tell you how it happened. I remember everything.
Oh, all right.
Once we had the 6 writers, and we had a female writer. They were mostly guys, and one was a female. One day she visited the set. Although we were in west side of New York, I was at 66th Street in the offices, where at Sesame Street and Electric Company have the offices. The actors were across town in the studio at 3rd Avenue or something. So we didn't get over to the studio very much. We're busy writing. And she goes over there to visit one day to see how they're doing with something she had written. And there was a 10-minute break that's, okay, take 10, everybody. And when that happens, the guy would turn the lights down, or most of the lights anyway, leave a few lights on, but it'd turn on the lights that are on the set. And she's sitting there having, I think, a sandwich or something, or a coffee, and she's looking at a monitor that happened to be on. And she sees 2 people talking, just 2, could be crew people, it could be actors, but they're just in silhouette because a camera happened to be on, and it caught them in silhouette. And as she watches them, their lips are moving, she said, you know what, I could have a syllable coming out of one person, and the other person does the other syllable. Then we make the letters move together to become a word. And so if a kid had learned the word cow, because you learn 1-syllable words first, then you learn the word boy, then you can make him learn a 2-syllable word by putting them together. You do cowboy, which was one of the words we did first.
Wow.
But it was a woman who discovered it by saying 2 people in silhouette that's talking without hearing their sound at the studio.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. I remember that. I remember seeing that as a kid. The silhouette, the words coming out of the mouth. Perfect.
Yeah, that's one of the things people always remember.
Paul, you were a working actor in Hollywood for almost 25 years, and you finally get your big break in the 1979 classic Breaking Away. Talk a little bit about what that did for your career and how you even got the role, if you can.
Well, I got into films late. I was 49 years old doing my first film with Robert Altman. I did A Wedding was the first one, and the second one was A Perfect Couple. And I was shooting a lead in his movie. I was called The Perfect Couple. And I got a call from my agent, and that's my favorite movie to shoot, maybe because I was in every scene and not a lead. But they said, they want to have you read for this movie. And I said, I don't have any time. I work every day. And they kept calling me, and then I was sloughing it off. And they said, they called me on the last day of the shoot, and they said, you're winding down over there. Can you go in to see them tonight after work? And I said, well, this is our last day. Yeah, I can go over and see them. So I went to see them. They gave me a script. I read about 10 pages, and I said, well, this is my father. I can play this in my sleep. And also it was written beautifully. The humor was fantastic. Great writing. He won the Oscar. Mm-hmm. But then they came out of the office, Steve Tessich, the writer, and the director, they came out and they said, I'm sorry, we have to leave now to go someplace. Can you come later tonight? Can you come tomorrow night and do a table reading with the whole cast? And I hadn't even auditioned yet, but I guess they knew something about me from Breaking Away. So I go to the table reading the next night. There's suits there. There are 4 or 5 people from Fox, or I forget the name of the studio. Maybe it was Fox. So there were maybe 12, 13 people in the audience, and some of them were involved with being producers and all that, and people from the studio. So instead of reading like 3 pages, which is a common audition, I was able to read every scene in the movie, so that my audition was the entire movie. So after about 15 pages, I was getting laughs, partly because Steve wrote such great stuff. And I said to myself, well, I'm going to get this because this is my audition, and I'm already getting laughs from this group of people. By the time it was done, I was pretty convinced I would get the job, which I did. And I was told that also someone, when they first called me, were speaking at the agency, and my agent was Robert Altman's agent, and also Peter, that was his name, the director of Breaking Bad. I forgot that momentarily.
Oh,
yeah, Peter Yates.
Yates, correct.
Who's British. Peter Yates and Steve Tessis. They're both with the same agent as Altman, and Altman got me into that agency as an actor. One day they're trying to think of the father, and they haven't cast him, and it was getting late. They had everyone else cast but the father. And someone said to my agent, some sub-agent, why don't you try the guy who was playing Dennis Christopher's father in Wedding? And Dennis Christopher's the lead in Breaking Away.
Right.
In Wedding, he was my son also, but had a small part because it was about his sister who was getting married. But he was there. I knew him, and we had worked together. But briefly, I mean, my scenes weren't with him specifically. But that connection from somebody remembering me being with Dennis Christopher, who played the lead in Breaking Away, and also had a part in The Wedding.
A Wedding,
and
right.
I was the guy, so they said, well, maybe it was his father then, now he can be his father now.
Amazing. So whose idea was it to, obviously I must ask you, whose idea was it to come up the way you would read the word refund?
Well, it's in the script. But I personally, I saw it's just another scene. It's funny because nobody in the world gets a refund on a used car. That's why it was funny. But I did try as an actor. I knew I was going to say it 3 or 4 times in the car lot, and then you find me in the bed with the doctor examining me because obviously I've lost my mind over it. I just decided I was going to say it 7 or 8 times, and each one would be slightly different.
Classic.
And finally, I do refund just more loud and louder and louder and louder. Then there's a cut. You find me in bed. And I say it to myself. I say, refund? Like, where am I now? Refund. I look at the doctor like, this is your fault. Refund? You need to give me money. It had all different meanings. And I went back to myself. I said, refund. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. And then he questions it again. Refund. Very interior,
Right, classic.
It was really, it struck a note because cab drivers yell it out their window at me, and truckers, and half the people I meet on the street say that, and the other half say.
Don't you sign that? Don't you sign that on some autograph photos as well?
I do. I've made pictures of me taken from the film, pushing the car out of the lot, and I write refund 3 times on it.
Let's talk about the John Hughes film. I believe it's 1984. 16 Candles. A lot of people probably may not know this, but you actually turned that role down as the dad a few times.
Yes, my agent was very impressed. I got this new agent after Breaking Away. I think I got something on my 50 rave reviews.
Right.
Things they mentioned about me, and they really singled me out about, hilarious and magnificent and terrific and all those things. So it was a thing that put me up the ladder about 2 steps.
Right.
So my agent, who was a very big agent at the time, who handled Meryl Streep and Woody Allen and all tons of people, E.L. Doctorow, the novelist, he's just one of the biggest agents in New York that Altman had, and he helped me get in with him. Well, he didn't want me to take a small part after that because that was virtually, it was one of the leads, really. I was billed after the boys, but it was one of the leads, really, in terms of screen time. He didn't want me to take parts with it. I just had a few lines because it would be a come down. But John Hughes wanted me because of Breaking Away. He had seen it. And he sent the script, and I read it. And I said, what do you think? I said, it doesn't have it's not a very big part. The parents are in the first 3 minutes, the last 3 minutes. He says, I would turn it down. So when I turned it down, they raised the price, which is how Hollywood thinks. They don't think you could not like the script. So they raised the price. They doubled it. And we turned it down again, and they tripled it. I still turned it down because we were hoping, my agent and I, for some plum role following Breaking Away. So now a month goes by, and I get a call from John Hughes personally. He asked my agent, could I just have his number where he is? And he says, I'm writing a scene. I want to send it to you. It's in the middle of the movie, and it makes you much more of a presence in the movie. And if you like it, I hope you do our film. I'd love to have you. So turning it down 3 times caused him to have even more interest and create that scene, which anybody who remembers me from it doesn't remember the beginning and end. They remember that scene where I'm an understanding father who tells her, sorry, we forgot your birthday. And all the young women I meet say, I wish you'd been my father. I get that all the time because he seemed like an ideal father. But that's how it happened.
Right. There's a famous scene when you're walking your daughter down the aisle as well.
Yeah. And I was also walking down the aisle with her sister. At some point, her sister,
yeah, right.
She comes down the aisle with, her sister comes first, and her sister had taken some pills because of her period.
Right.
And she was high, sort of, on some pills, painkillers. So she kept stumbling and falling over and into the people, the spectators.
Right.
And then I go back and pick her up.
And correct me if I'm wrong. Very interesting fact about that scene. That was John Belushi's mother.
She's one of the people in the audience.
Wow.
And it happened the girl accidentally fell over on her. I only learned later from somebody who knew her
wow.
that she was the woman that my daughter had fallen over.
Yeah, not too many people know that.
Too.
Folks, joining me on the phone is great character actor Paul Dooley, well known for playing dad roles alongside Molly Ringwald, Helen Hunt, Toni Collette, Mia Farrow, Julia Roberts. Very famous for being the dad in 16 Candles as well as Breaking Away. Paul, talk
and
about...
also Popeye.
Popeye, right.
Wimpy.
I was just about to say that. I was just about to segue. Talk about playing the role of Popeye with Robin Williams, of course.
Yeah, I did Wimpy. He did Popeye.
Yeah, right. Sorry, Wimpy.
That was a lot of fun for me.
Where did they film?
I was a boy cartoonist. I love comic strips, and I got to play one later.
Where was that actually filmed, Paul?
The island of Malta in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean.
And how long did that shoot last?
Unfortunately, 6 months.
I was going to say, my follow-up is, what the heck do you do in Malta for 6 months?
Nothing. we had 50 actors, and among them were people one more talented than the other. We were so bored there. There were no movies to see, no television, local. We were on an island between Sicily and North Africa. And nothing to do, nothing to see. So we became our own entertainment. One night we put on a variety show. Everybody had talent. There were guitar players. Shelley Duvall did something. Robin was a master of ceremonies. I did some of my old nightclub act.
Wow.
I did some vaudeville sketches with Richard Libertini, and it lasted 4 hours, and it was hilarious. And then about 2 months later, we did another one. It lasted 2.5 hours. And we would just go on stage, come out and sit in the audience. Our whole audience was people connected with the show. We even had Maltese workers there who knew a little English.
Oh, wow.
They would, even if they didn't know any English, they knew us because they worked with us all the time. By the way, we also had Fellini's cinematographer and Fellini's crew.
Wow.
So that's pretty amazing.
And a lot of...
Go
ahead.
That's the guy who also directed the movie All That Jazz, which was about Bob Fosse.
Wow. And there's a lot of birthday cakes. A lot of birthday cakes on the set, too, as well.
Giuseppe Rotuno is his name.
A lot of birthday cakes on the set, too, Paul.
Yeah. It was a wonderful experience, and they had wonderful actors. Donald Moffat was one of them, just great people. Linda Hunt was one of them. You know, that woman who's about 4 feet tall.
And for the role of Wimpy, Dom DeLuise and Buddy Hacker were vying for the role as well.
That's what I was told. But Robert Altman said to me, I don't want the audience to be watching the movie and think, oh, there's Buddy Hackett. I want them to think, oh, here's Wimpy. Or they didn't want them to say, oh, that's Dom DeLuise. So he would rather have what he called a blank slate. He said, you hadn't done that much film, and you're going to look different. So they were looking at Wimpy for the first time in the way I'd like them to. So he didn't want a name doing it.
Right.
And Shelley Duvall wasn't yet really a name.
And that was something...
And Robin was this is Robin's first movie.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So he was, of course, more convincing, but he liked the idea of him doing it as his first movie.
I mean, Robin was a very he was a great actor as well on screen. He was a great actor. He
was great. His dramatic work was wonderful.
And that was a switch for you, a 360 for you, because you, like I said, you played a lot of dad roles, and you're known for that, and you play Wimpy. I mean, that must have been pretty fun for you.
Yeah, I really prefer comedy. Right. I just found by accident I got put in dramatic roles. Robert Altman put me in Wedding. I was playing more or less a dramatic role, and I played a kind of in a rom-com called A Perfect Couple. That was more like a Jack Lemmon type role. And I guess more of my film and television career has been serious acting, although I prefer comedy. And all the movies I did with Christopher Guest, I did play comedy roles.
I thought I heard you say once that you would never want to be in a sitcom, that where you played a dad all for like 5 or 6 seasons, or a character.
Yeah, I never wanted to play something for that long.
Yeah,
because I think it's fun to do fresh things.
Right.
And I definitely would never want to do like a cop show or, one of those shows where it's all about guns and people getting killed all the time and they're all the same. And no matter what you do, each week. I'm a friend of Joe Mantegna's, and each week those guys have to say things like, what about tire tracks? What about blood spatter?
Right.
What's the DNA?
Exactly.
There's a whole bunch of those,
Yeah.
How about any priors? Somebody has to say that every damn week.
That's so true, so true. You make good money, but, you're doing it over and over and over.
Well, I made enough money. I was happy anyway. And
yeah,
of course,
steady work.
My wife is even more successful than me.
Talk about what she's doing. Talk about working with the great Al Pacino in Insomnia.
Well, that was great, I love him. I think he's one of our greatest actors, of course. I always thought De Niro, Pacino were the great actors in Brando.
What makes them so good? What makes them so good, Paul? So great.
I don't know. It's just because they seem more real in their characterizations than a lot of actors do. But I've come to believe that Seymour Hoffman's our greatest film actor.
Wow.
Because when I saw for the second time about 2 years ago, him playing Truman Capote, I could not believe this guy transformed himself into Capote and manifested that man so perfectly that he was breathing and living the guy.
They're very methody.
Yeah.
Paul, we're getting ready to wrap this up. My God, I'm having so much fun. You've worked with so many actors during your more than 60 years in show business. Hard to believe, isn't it? Is there an actor or director that you've always wanted to work with but never have?
Well, I worked with Soderbergh, who's famous, and Altman, who's famous.
Ocean's 11, yeah.
And Christopher Nolan, who did Insomnia. The guy who directed me in a play called Kiss Me Goodbye had also directed To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh, wow.
And so that was a thrill to meet him. Yeah, there are guys. There's a number of guys I would like to work with. The Adam Mckay is a guy who works with. He works with Will Ferrell, their partners, and he just recently, I think, he directed the thing about Dick Cheney that was.
Vice.
So he's in serious things as well as comedy. And he also was in Second City. He's an improviser. And he's done a lot of Adam Sandler scripts and Will Ferrell scripts, and I like his work very much. I wanted to mention, because you may know it, and others may not.
Paul, real quick, timing it plays a major role in the lifespan of an actor. One instance where timing did not work out for you was to play the part in Death of a Salesman.
Yeah, I love that from the minute I had seen it. I first heard it on a record, and then I've seen it now 6 times, different people. I saw George Scott do it. I saw Dustin do it.
Yeah, Brian Dennehy. It always
hit me in the heart because of the father-son stuff. and his disappointment to his father, his disappointment in himself, the character of Biff. In college, I thought someday I'll play Hap, the brother.
Yes.
Well, maybe I'm too older now. Maybe I'll play Biff. No, maybe I'll play the neighbor. But I never thought I would play Willie because I was too intimidated by the part. But then I got a call from Dustin Hoffman when I was in 16 Candles. He was making a pre-Broadway tour of it, and he asked me if I'd like to play the neighbor, Charlie. And I said, "Oh God, there's nothing I would like better, but I have a contract to do another movie with Robert Altman, which starts in about a week." I was just finishing 16 Candles and going down to Phoenix to work with Robert. So I came very close to working in the Broadway tour that Dustin Hoffman did. He did it out of town for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. So that was something I missed the boat on.
Yeah, too bad. You would have been great. You would have been great. I mean, I know Brian Denny, he played a major, he played that as well, and you would have definitely fit right in. But
I saw his salesman. I saw all of them because I love it so much.
Amazing. You're one of the greats, Paul. Do you know that?
I don't know. That's for you to say.
No, you're one of the greats. I mean, you wouldn't be working this long with so many great people, and
I'm just happy when I work.
Yeah, and you have something coming up. Talk about that real quick with James Brolin.
It's in Life in Pieces. It's called. There's a couple episodes coming up still, almost next week or the week after. And I play the father of James Brolin at 90 years old, and they wrote hilarious stuff for me to say. And I also have been doing a recurring role, and the kids are all right as a priest who's kind of funny too.
Real quick.
I enjoyed working with Larry David on.
Oh, Larry David, my God,
father-in-law.
We didn't even get into that. My goodness, how was working with Larry? I mean, is he like he is on screen, off screen?
No, he's not like that. People always ask me, is he hard to get along with? Because his character, his persona, is a guy who likes to say no when you're saying yes, and he's always going against the grain. But he doesn't do that with the people he works with because it's not in his interest to be annoying to his fellow actors and his cast members and the crew members. So he's a great guy to work with. He laughs a lot.
Are they doing another season?
One of his tricks is he laughs at his jokes while he's telling them. He smiles when he does his jokes.
Oh, my goodness.
But he could be less like that character. But he does have perverse quality,
Right.
That's why he created the series like that.
Are they going to make another? Are they making another season? Do you know?
I don't know, because once he divorced his wife, I wasn't there anymore. So the last season or two of the go-round. Then he did a revival, and I don't know, they'll probably come back.
Yeah, the great Bob Einstein passed away, too. It's too bad.
Yeah, he was great in that show.
Funkhauser, he was great. It was great. Paul, real quick, you were in Slapshot. A lot of people may not know that. One of my favorites.
That's right. It's a one-day job, but I enjoyed it.
Oh, great. Paul, this has been great for interviewing such a guy with such your resume is so vast. And thank you so much for coming on. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for doing what you're doing. And keep doing what you're doing. Obviously, you're still in demand, and God bless you.
Well, take care. It's great talking to you.
All right, Paul, we'll talk to you soon. Good luck.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, folks, the great character.